إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we got to the section where the author was talking about how our iman in the names and attributes of Allah is. And he was going to mention now 4 prohibitions. 4 prohibitions that we are not to fall into. 4 prohibitions that we have to make sure we stay clear of. And that is the section where he mentions من غير تحريف ولا تعطيل ومن غير تكييف ولا تمثيل. That we believe in what Allah has attributed to Himself and what the Messenger has attributed to him without falling into tahrif, nor ta'til, nor takyif, and neither tamthil. These are 4 things that we're going to discuss now. 4 prohibitions. 4 things that we do not do when it comes to the names and attributes of Allah. So the first is tahrif. Tahrif is distortion, making a form of distortion. And what that means is changing the words of the names and attributes or changing their meanings. Changing the actual words of the names and attributes of Allah or changing their meanings. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala criticized and mentioned the dispraiseworthiness of those who do this, those who perform tahrif. They change the words or the meanings. As Allah mentioned regarding those Jews who changed the words and the speech from its actual meaning. يحرفون الكلمة عن مواضعه. They make tahrif. They change and alter and distort the meanings from their actual and original meaning. أي يغيرونه ويفسرونه بغير معناه. So they change the meanings and they give explanations that are not the actual explanations, that are not the intended and actual meanings. So tahrif, what we mean by tahrif is at-taghyir وَإِمَالَةُ الشَّيْءِ عَنْ وَجْهِهِ. Tahrif is changing something and distorting something from its original state. Changing something and distorting something from its original state, its original meaning. يقال انحراف عن كذا أو انحرف عن كذا أي مال وعدل. That if something is munharif, meaning that it is bent away it is distorted away from where it should be. So tahrif is changing the names and attributes and their meanings away from their actual meaning and where they should be. Making tahrif of those meanings away from their actual meaning and what they are supposed to be. So the tahrif, it is التغيير لألفاظ الأسماء والصفات أو معانيها. It is therefore changing the words or the meanings of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, like the Jahmiyyah, when they said regarding the ayah Ar-Rahman ala al-arsh istawa. Ar-Rahman, he rose above the throne. Ala al-arsh istawa. But they make tahrif. They distort the words and the meanings away from where they are supposed to be. So instead of istawa, they change it into the meaning of istawla, adding a lam into it. Istawa, istawla. And by doing that, they change the meaning of what is intended, that Allah conquered the throne, rather than Allah being the Most High who rose above the throne. They say istawla instead of istawa. So they make tahrif. And those examples, we're going to look at them in proper detail later. Now this is just a brief synopsis, general examples to make the point and to understand, but the details we're going to get to later. Another example is وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ. In the ayah, when it mentions وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ, and your Lord, He came, they say, no, it is not Allah who comes. They say the meaning is وَجَاءَ أَمْرُ رَبِّكَ. The command of your Lord comes. So they've made tahrif, distortion, and changing the meaning away from its intended and actual meaning. Allah says He comes, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ. But they say no, وَجَاءَ أَمْرُ رَبِّكَ. The command of your Lord comes, your Lord does not come. So they distort and change the meaning and give an explanation that takes it away from its intended meaning. So we can say, therefore, tahrif is two types. Therefore, tahrif is two types. The first is the tahriful lafz, making the tahrif in the actual words. In the actual words. And even though this is far less and it is not as common, it does occur where occasionally they try to change the actual words so that they can change the meanings of the names and the attributes. An example of that is the ayah وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. The ayah affirms the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Musa alayhi salam. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. They make tahrif of the actual word and change the dhamma to a fatha. So they say, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهَ Musa Taklima. Instead of وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ, they change the word وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهَ. Because by doing that, it then means Musa spoke to Allah, but it doesn't affirm the speech of Allah talking to Musa. So they reject the speech of Allah in that way. So that is an example of tahrif al-lafz. Another one, like we just mentioned, is istawa. Istawa, when they say istawla, they add the lam into the word. Istawa, istawla. So instead of affirming al-istiwa, that Allah rises above the throne, they say no, this is just Allah conquers the throne and conquers the affairs. The second type of tahrif is at-tahrif al-ma'nawi, the tahrif in meaning, where they change the actual intended meanings of the names and attributes of Allah into something that is not intended. And this, or these two types, they have been mentioned by the scholars. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, وَالتَّحْرِيفُ نَوْعَانِ تَحْرِيفُ اللَّفْظ وَتَحْرِيفُ الْمَعْنَى. That tahrif, this distortion, is of two types. The distortion in the actual words, the change in the actual words, and the second type, the change in the meanings. They give explanations, and their explanations are distorted and away from the actual and original intended meanings. And this second type of tahrif, at-tahrif al-ma'nawi, whereby they give explanations from themselves and they change the meanings of the names and attributes of Allah, this is widespread amongst the people of innovation. This is common amongst them. As Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala mentions, التحريف المعنوي هو الذي وقع فيه كثير من الناس. The tahrif in meaning, that is what many of the people they fell into. So Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we believe in the names and attributes of Allah without any form of the tahrif, neither in the actual words and neither in the meanings. The second item mentioned here is wala ta'til. Ta'til is a nullification. Ta'til is a nullification of something, to clear something out and to get rid of something, to nullify something, to make it null and void. تعطيل. وهو لغة الإخلاء, to strip something bare, to strip something bare, to make it vacant and empty and to nullify it. تعطيل. That is the second affair that is being mentioned here. And the point of ta'til, it is that they nullify and reject the names and attributes of Allah, the people of innovation. And so we as Ahlul Sunnah do not do that whatsoever. We do not nullify and negate and reject the names and attributes of Allah whatsoever. So ta'til, that is the second matter. Ta'til, meaning a nullification and making something void and vacant and empty and getting rid of it. And that is like it mentions in the Quran, وَبِئْرٍ مُعَطَّلَةٍ وَبِئْرٍ مُعَطَّلَةٍ, a well that is abandoned, unused, void, vacant, nullified, no purpose to it, gone, finished. That is ta'til. In our topic, the meaning of it specifically is إنكار ما أثبت الله لنفسه من الأسماء والصفات. To reject, this is what ta'til is in our discussion now, to reject the names and attributes that Allah has affirmed for Himself. If you reject any of the names and attributes that Allah has affirmed for Himself, then that is ta'til. سواء كان كليا أو جزئيا, regardless of whether that is a complete rejection or a partial rejection. Whether it is a complete rejection or a partial rejection, all of that is ta'til, which is impermissible. وسواء كان ذلك بتحريف أو بجحود هذا كله يسمى تعطيلا. And whether, regardless of whether you end up in ta'til because you outright reject the names and attributes of Allah, or you end up in ta'til because you make tahrif. If you do tahrif, you can end up in ta'til therefore, because if you distort and change the names and attributes from their original meanings to something else, it means that you are rejecting those names and attributes upon their actual meaning. You have rejected those names and attributes upon the actual intended meaning. So those who perform tahrif, then they have performed ta'til also. Ta'til can occur from that tahrif. You distort and change the attribute to something else, meaning the original and actual meaning of the name or the attribute, then that you have rejected, you have done ta'til of it. So this is the second affair. أن أهل السنة والجماعة لا يعطلون أي اسم من أسماء الله. Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we do not reject any name or attribute from the names and attributes of Allah. Al-Shaykh Al-Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions, what is the difference between ta'til and tahrif then? What is the difference between ta'til and tahrif then? قلنا التحريف في الدليل والتعطيل في المدلول. The tahrif occurs in the actual evidences. They distort those evidences, change those evidences either in the actual words or in the meanings. So tahrif occurs in the texts, in the evidences. ta'til occurs in what those evidences then indicate to us. The evidences indicate to us Allah has particular names and particular attributes. They make ta'til of those conclusions. They make ta'til of what is being evidenced by those evidences. So in the evidences, they make the distortion, and what those evidences are showing, that's where they make their ta'til. They reject what the evidences are showing. And instead, they take the evidences and make them show something else. Tahrif. So for example, when Allah says, بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ, that the two hands of Allah are outspread, they say, no, this means قُوَّتَهُ, His two powers. They say Allah does not have two hands, Allah has two powers, they say. So that is changing, doing tahrif of the evidence. The evidence mentions the two hands of Allah. They make tahrif of it and say, no, it's not the two hands, it is actually the two powers of Allah. And then as a consequence, they have ended up in ta'til because they have rejected the actual meaning of those evidences, rejected affirming the two hands of Allah. So they make tahrif in the evidences and therefore end up upon ta'til in the conclusions from those evidences and what those evidences show. So in that case, when a person says that the two hands of Allah, they are actually the two powers of Allah, they are the two powers of Allah, then he has done tahrif of the meaning and ta'til of the intended actual evidence and what it shows. So tahrif is distortion and changing. Ta'til is rejection of those names and attributes. And Ahlul Sunnah, we do not fall into either of them. We do not change and distort what Allah has told us in the Quran and what the Messenger has told us in the Sunnah. And neither do we reject what Allah has told us in the Quran and what the Messenger has told us in the Sunnah. So the meaning of ta'til, as we said, جحد الصفات وإنكار قيامها بذاته ونفي ما دلت عليه من صفات الكمال. It is to reject the attributes and to reject those attributes being attached to or being from the essence of Allah and negating what those attributes indicate, rejecting what they actually mean. And the first person to do ta'til, the first individual to do ta'til was Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham. Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham, the first individual who fell into that ta'til, and so he was in the end actually killed by Khalid ibn Abdullah al-Qisari. Khalid ibn Abdullah killed Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham. Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham, the first one who performed this ta'til, rejection of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when Khalid ibn Abdullah killed Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham, it was on the day of Eid. He killed him and he said, O people, go and do your sacrifices, for indeed today I am sacrificing Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham. And he killed him for that distortion and that deviance and that level that he went to against the correct Aqidah. But Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham, his methodology and his ideology, it was taken on by Al-Jahm ibn Safwan, Al-Jahm ibn Safwan at-Tirmidhi, and he then spread it, and he is the one who has become famous for it, and everybody is attributed to him who follows it, the Jahmiyyah. But Al-Jahm ibn Safwan took this from Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham. And then it was spread by him, Al-Jahm ibn Safwan, and so it then became famous to him, the Jahmiyyah. Those who follow that methodology of rejection of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ta'atil, when we talk about this rejection, and we are now establishing the principles. This principle now is very important. It will be important for all of the other attributes in the book. We don't do ta'atil. We don't reject the names and attributes of Allah. And ta'atil, it can be of different types. There are different levels of ta'atil, but the point of it is that it is a rejection of the names and attributes of Allah. The third point is then the takyif. The takyif. And the takyif, this is in relation to specifying the details and the descriptions of a particular attribute. Detailing the specifics of a particular attribute. Giving detail and specifics and the howness, what it looks like, how it is, details of the attributes. That is takyif. So Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen mentions at-takyif is أن تذكر كيفية الصفة, that you start to talk about the details of what the attribute is, how it looks like, what it is. You start to give details about that attribute. What is the problem with this? The problem is, we said at the beginning, we are only going to take our knowledge about the names and attributes from that which we find in the Quran and the Sunnah. Have we been given and have we found in the Quran and the Sunnah descriptions and details of what all of these attributes of Allah are and what they look like? And have we been given all of those specific details? No. So if a person starts making them up himself, well, this attribute, I think it's probably like this and like that, and I think it probably looks like this and it probably looks like that, and starts making up descriptions and imaginations, then that is takyif, which is impermissible. And the takyif, it is something which is established with the question, how? If you ask somebody, how did such and such happen? How this, how that? And the person then replies to your question, he is now giving you a takyif of something. For example, if you say, كيف جاء زيد? How did Zayd come? How did he come? How did Zayd come? How did he come? And you say, جاء راكبا. He came riding on a horse or riding on a camel. You've now explained how he came. You've explained he came riding on a camel or horse or whatever it was. So he didn't come walking, He came riding. You have now explained and given the takyif of how he came, the kayfa. If somebody was to say to you in Arabic, kayfa lawn as-sayyara, how is the color of the car? And you tell them, abyad, white. You have now done takyif. You have given an explanation, a detail about that particular item. So for us, it is not possible to start making takyif of the names and attributes of Allah. This is important to remember these points. We cannot start saying if Allah tells us He has a particular attribute, that we start imagining, okay, maybe it looks like this then, and I assume it's like that then, and you start imagining all these details and descriptions about the attributes of Allah. That is not correct. We don't start imagining what Allah looks like. We don't start imagining what these attributes look like. We know generally what the meanings of the attributes are, and we're going to get to those in the book inshaAllah. But we don't do takyif. We don't start saying it's like this, or the description of that attribute is that it is X, Y, and Z. Who has told you it is X, Y, and Z? Who has told you those specific details about this attribute? No one. You have made it up. So Ahlul Sunnah, we don't do that. We do not start making up our own descriptions for the attributes of Allah. Descriptions that Allah has not informed us of in the Quran and the Sunnah. But the people of innovation, that's exactly what they do. They start to imagine, okay, it must be like this and that description and this description. And they start making up their own descriptions and their own details and imagining their own things about the attributes of Allah, even though none of those things have been mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah. So the third point here is the takyif. It's like al-istiwa, that Allah rose above the throne. We don't know how that happens. If a person starts saying, yes, Allah rises above the throne like this and like that, and he starts explaining it in details, where have you got those from? That is takyif. Allah has not informed us of the details of how He rises above the throne. He has simply informed us of al-istiwa, that He rises above the throne, that Allah is established above the throne. But He hasn't told us how. If you start now giving details of how, yes, it's like this and like that, and Allah rises up like this, you're doing takyif now, which is not permissible. If the Salaf used to say, قال بعض السلف, the Salaf, they used to say, إذا قال لك الجهمي, if a Jahmi, the ones who reject the attributes of Allah, if he says to you, إن الله ينزل إلى السماء, that Allah descends to the lowest heaven. We know that. But when he says to you, فَكَيْفَ يَنْزِلُ, how does Allah descend? Like in the narration it says, in the last third of the night Allah descends to the lowest heaven. So the Jahmi says to you, okay, Allah descends to the lowest heaven. How does Allah descend? You say to him, indeed, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَخْبَرَنَا أَنَّهُ يَنْزِلُ, Allah has informed us that He descends. وَلَمْ يُخْبِرْنَا كَيْفَ يَنْزِلُ, but He has not informed us of how He descends. And this is a principle when it comes to those affairs. We affirm the attributes as Allah has mentioned them, but we cannot go beyond into trying to give our own explanations and descriptions of those attributes. If somebody says, okay, we believe in that attribute, but how does Allah do it? You cannot answer the how Allah does it, because Allah hasn't told us the how of how He does it. So we affirm the attribute, but we don't go into trying to make up explanations. Allah rises above the throne in this way and that way. and Allah descends to the lowest heaven in this way and that way. We haven't been told about this way and that way. So you cannot go into that imagination and description yourself. So that is the takyif, meaning you are specifying the detail of a particular attribute. وكيفية الشيء صفته وحاله، فالتكييف تعيين كنه الصفة وكيفيتها، وهذا مما استأثر الله به فلا سبيل إلى الوصول إليه إذا الصفة تابعة للموصوف، فكما لا يعلم كيف هو إلا هو فكذلك صفاته، فالصفات يحظى فيها حظو الذات. So when it comes to the names or the attributes of Allah, we cannot start to give descriptions because those details are from the knowledge that Allah has kept to Himself. The how does Allah descend? How does Allah rise above the throne? How this, how that? That is a knowledge that Allah has kept to Himself. And we do not know of that knowledge and we are not able to achieve that knowledge. Because the attributes of Allah, they return back to the essence of Allah. Do we know of the essence of Allah and how Allah is? So therefore, if we don't know that, we don't know the how and the details and the specifics and the descriptions of the attributes of Allah. We cannot start to say, but Allah does it this way or does it that way. We don't know that. We know Allah descends, we know Allah rises above the throne, we know those things, but we don't know how those things occur. Allah hasn't told us how, so we do not get into the how. So there is a famous example mentioned regarding Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, that Allah Ar-Rahman rose above the throne. And if you were to say how did Allah rise above the throne, we say 4 points in reply. Point number 1, we say firstly, it is established that Allah rose above the throne. Al-Istiwa ma'loom, that is something known and established. Let's make that clear first, you say to him. It is known and established, proven, and we accept that, and we believe in that. Secondly though, and secondly it matches on from that, the second point is, therefore we have iman in it. Al-Istiwa, that Allah rises above the throne, is known and it is established. Secondly, we therefore have absolute iman in it. Thirdly, we don't know how Allah does that. We don't know about the how of it. That is unknown to us. And asking about that, how does Allah rise above the throne? How does Allah do this and how is that and how is this attribute? Then that is a bid'ah. Why is it a bid'ah? A person may say, I'm just trying to understand my religion. We say because the Salaf, they were far greater in their zeal to understand the religion. And they knew that these questions on those affairs are outside of the knowledge we have been given. So it is not upon you to now ask that which the Salaf did not ask. Stop at where they stopped. قف حيث وقف القوم. Asking those questions and delving into those affairs are matters that you have not been preceded in. And they are matters we have not been given knowledge of. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. You have not been given from knowledge except a small amount. And so, asking those questions and delving into those affairs, then that would be considered an innovation. And that is a famous narration that comes from Al-Imam Malik, when on one occasion Al-Imam Malik, he was teaching and he mentioned that ayah, Ar-Rahman ala al-arsh istawa, and somebody said, Kayf istawa? How did Allah do the istiwa? And that's when Al-Imam Malik mentioned those 4 points to him. Al-istiwa ma'loom. It is known and established that Allah rises above the throne. Wal-kayfu majhul. How Allah does that, we don't know. Wal-imanu bihi wajib. But to believe in it as Allah has informed us of it is obligatory. Was-su'alu anhu bid'ah. But asking about it and delving into it and how, that's a bid'ah. That's an innovation. If you think you are seeking closeness to Allah by delving into that, you are not. You are falling into the paths of the people of deviation who delved into these matters we have not been given knowledge of and we have not been preceded by the Salaf in. So that is the third point, the takyif. The fourth point is at-tamthil, that we do not fall into at-tamthil. Tamthil is making resemblance. Tamthil is very similar to tashbih, but we use the word at-tamthil, not the word at-tashbih, when it comes to these points of Aqidah, because in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about this, He used the word or the reference of tamthil. Laysa kamithlihi shay. So we say tamthil instead of tashbih, but the meaning is similar for the purposes of understanding. That we do not make a resemblance and comparison between Allah and His creation. فالشبيه والمثيل والنظير ألفاظ متقاربة فلا تمثل صفاته بصفات خلقه فإنه لا مثل له ولا شبه له ولا نظير لا في ذاته ولا في أسمائه وصفاته وأفعاله. So we cannot ever make any comparisons between the attributes of Allah and anything in creation. We cannot make any resemblance between the attributes of Allah and anything in creation. So when Allah mentions one of His attributes, we can't say that the attribute of Allah, it must occur like this or like that. Allah descends, you can't say, as some of the Sufis and the people of innovation lie and make up a story about Ibn Taymiyyah. They lie and they make up a story about Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. They say that on one occasion, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah walked down the mimbar in the Masjid. He walked down the mimbar and he said, Allah descends just like I descended. He descended down the mimbar and said, Allah descends as I have descended. And this is an absolute lie against Ibn Taymiyyah. In fact, the Sufis, when they mention this story and they quote this story that Ibn Taymiyyah said this, the time that they quote it from, when they say that this occurred and when they claim they heard and saw Ibn Taymiyyah do this, if you look into the books of history, at that time, Ibn Taymiyyah was actually in prison. He wasn't in the Masjid walking down the mimbar. Lies that they make up. So we do not make any resemblance or comparison of the attributes of Allah to us, to anything in creation. Allah descends, we don't say, okay, so Allah descends like we descend. No. Allah rises above the throne, we don't start giving examples, okay, like this rise or that, or nothing. There is no comparison between Allah and His creation. And we do not make resemblances between Allah's attributes and the attributes of creation. And this tashbih or this tamthil, it can occur in different ways. The people of innovation and misguidance and shirk have done this in different ways. Some of them have made tamthil between the creation and the creator, between something in creation to the creator. Like the example of the Christians. They made the tamthil or the tashbih of something in creation to Allah. What in creation? Isa alayhi salam. They compared Isa alayhi salam, who is from the creation, to the creator Allah, and they said He is Allah and He is one of the Trinity and He is the Son of Allah. They compared a creation to the creator. Absolute falsehood and batil. Or for example, like some of the mushrikun, they compared their idols to Allah. Their idols in creation, comparing them to Allah. And this type, it is of course complete falsehood, and the revelations have come to rebuke comparing creation to Allah. The second type, the second method, is comparing the creator to the creation. The first type was what? Comparing the creation to the creator. The second type, comparing the creator to the creation. The other way around. The first type, comparing the creation to the creator. Like comparing Isa to Allah, as the Christians did. Isa alayhi salam is from the creation, and they were comparing him to the creator, to Allah, making him like Allah. The second type now we're talking about is the other way around. When people make a resemblance and a comparison of the creator to the creation. So they say that Allah's attributes are like our attributes. So they say when Allah mentions, for example, the hands or other attributes, then they are like ours. Or in the ayah, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, that Allah is the all-seeing and the all-hearing. They make the comparison of the creator to the creation, and they say Allah is all-hearing and all-seeing. Allah sees and hears like we see and hear. And that is not the case. You cannot compare the creator to the creation. You cannot say, okay, Allah hears and sees, we hear and see, so Allah hears and sees like we hear and see. And you make a resemblance between the hearing and seeing of the Creator to the hearing and seeing that we have. And that is impermissible also. That is also from the tamthil, which is haram, which is impermissible for a person to fall into. فأهل السنة يتبرؤون من تمثيل الله عز وجل بخلقه لا في ذاته ولا في صفاته. So Ahlul Sunnah, we declare our innocence from making resemblance of Allah to creation, neither in His essence and nor in His names and attributes. This therefore means that every person who does tamthil has therefore also by necessity ended up doing takyif. You cannot do tamthil without having done takyif as well. Every person who does tamthil has ended up doing takyif as well. How is that? Creation, and you say that Allah, His seeing is like our seeing. You've done tamthil. But then you've also done takyif because you've now described Allah seeing in a particular way. You've described Allah seeing like our seeing. It's a description and a specific statement about the attribute of Allah, of the howness of how Allah sees. So by doing tamthil, by default you are doing takyif as well. But not necessarily everybody who does takyif is doing tamthil, because somebody may give some form of description and imagination, but it's not necessarily something that they are directly making a comparison or resemblance to in creation. But both of those, at-takyif wa tamthil, are impermissible. Both of those are haram. And of course we have the ayah in the Quran, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing like unto Him. There is no comparison to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah also told us in the Quran, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And there is nobody equal or comparable to Him. And similarly, فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا. Do not make any equals or comparables to Allah. There are many ayat. فَلَا تَضْرِبُوا لِلَّهِ الْأَمْثَالِ. Do not make parables or examples of Allah to creation or to other affairs. So the ayat and the evidences there are plentiful. And the Salaf, they were very strong and strict on this affair. ولهذا أطلق بعض السلف القول بالتكفير لمن مثل الله بخلقه. Some of the Salaf even said it is kufr, the ones who compare Allah to creation. So for example, Nu'aym ibn Hammad al-Khuza'i, the Shaykh of Imam al-Bukhari, he said, من شبه الله بخلقه فقد كفر. Whomsoever resembles Allah to His creation, compares Allah to His creation, then he has disbelieved. So those are the four main points to remember here. And they are the absolutely critical points to remember. Because everything we study in this book will depend on you remembering those four things. That all of the names and attributes we're going to learn them and accept them without any form of tahrif. We're not going to be changing or altering or giving our own explanations as they are, without tahrif and distortion and what you think and what I think and what the Imam thinks and your own explanations. No tahrif. Without also any ta'til. We're not going to reject any of them. If Allah tells us He has certain names and attributes in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Messenger, which is established, then we will have iman in them. Not like the people of innovation reject some of them because it doesn't make sense to them. If Allah's informed us about them in the Quran or in the established Sunnah, then we have iman in them. And we do not go into takyif. We believe in them, have iman in them, but not try to describe them. And this is how Allah does the istiwa. And this is how Allah descends to the last third of the night. We don't know how. So we can't start talking about this is how Allah does this and this is how Allah does that. And this is what Allah, His attribute looks like. We don't know that. And we're not going to do that. And fourthly, without tamthil. When we talk about the names and attributes of Allah, we're not going to start imagining what we have. We're going to affirm that Allah is the all-hearing and the all-seeing. We're not going to start imagining how we see and how we hear. And we're not going to start making resemblance and comparison of Allah's attributes to what we have. Those four things are absolutely vital, you must remember. Because all of the book depends on it. Everything in the book, the Aqidah, is based upon these principles. If you forget those principles, you'll end up going into the methods of the people of innovation. So those are the key principles. That's what you must learn for now. And you have next week off. There is no class next week. The next class will be in 2 weeks' time, insha'Allah. So you have plenty of time to revise these opening sections. That's 7 lessons now, 8 lessons we've done in Wasatiyyah. The first 7, 8 lessons now, revise them, listen to the audios, the videos, etc. Practice them carefully, and then in 2 weeks' time we'll move on to the next section, insha'Allah. Any questions or anything?
The common statement that the people in Spain say, they say that all of the scholars are in prison, and that they take examples of the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah, that he was in prison, thereby the real scholars are in prison, especially in our time now.
That's not a proof of anything. Somebody gets imprisoned, that's supposed to be a proof of their piety and how they are right? Not necessarily at all. There is no principle for that whatsoever. How many people are in prison and they are absolute murderers and thieves and whatever else? That's not a proof of anything. The proof of a person being upon righteousness and being upon the truth and the haqq is to judge their position and their belief and what they say upon the Quran and the Sunnah. If those people speak with what is in the Quran and the Sunnah absolutely, then they are people of the truth, regardless of whether they are in prison or not. But just because a person is in prison doesn't automatically mean it's because he was speaking the truth and he was imprisoned. What is the reason why he was imprisoned? Many of these so-called scholars of theirs that they say are the real scholars have tendencies of the Khawarij. They have tendencies of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. They have tendencies of Sayyid Qutb and all of these types of people. They have deviances. So if you want to judge the reality of a person, if he is truly a scholar upon the way of the Salaf, look at his affair. Look at what he teaches and what he propagates and what his methodology is. And these people who are imprisoned, many of them, when you check, you will see their oppositions to the Quran and the Sunnah, to the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah. You will see it clearly. So this claim that the real scholars are in prison is baseless. Check the Aqidah and the manhaj of those in prison, and let's see if it matches up to the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah, and you will see it does not. So prison or no prison, that is not a condition of anything. A Salafi scholar may end up imprisoned, and then again, a deviant may end up imprisoned. That isn't the basis you judge whether somebody is upon the truth or not.
So, these 4 types of people, can we say they're Muslims? Are they Muslims?
Yeah, they are Muslims. We're going to get to those details later. Some of them may not be, who went to extremes, but those details, they'll become more clear when we go into more of the book. But they are Muslims generally because they make mistakes, they don't understand, they have confusion about things. So we can't say all of them are kuffar who do these things. Some of them may be, and the Salaf spoke about those, but we'll get into the details of that later, inshallah. Anybody else?
Are the lessons cancelled next week? So can you just elaborate in terms of what will be happening next week as a result of the lessons?
Next week is the conference in Birmingham. Because of the conference in Birmingham, all the classes are going to be happening at the Masjid in Birmingham in Wright Street. So everybody should try and go there for next weekend. All the mosques and the marakis and the brothers from everywhere, they're going to attend in Birmingham next week. So try and attend there next weekend, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. That's why the classes are cancelled in the north and all the other places.
What time?
All weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all day there's going to be classes going on. So anytime you go there, people are going to go and stay there, get a hotel or something, stay there Friday night, Saturday night, all 3